Hello and welcome. A lot of you know me based on my Spotlight Series winning deck, Mobilize the Leyline, that I brewed for the 2025 Spotlight Series Spider-Man, and ended up winning that Spotlight Series. I've, of course, mentioned in a lot of comments and posts that I would be upgrading this deck and that I was looking forward to the last Avatar set. So this is what we have come up with so far in our testing, only after 2 days of testing. And of course, there's a bit of a time gap there where we're testing for Modern as well with the regional championships in Calgary this coming weekend. But so far, this is what we have come up with. So this is the Firebending Leyline version. And you'll notice that a few things have changed here. First, we have cut down on a lot of cards. So we have cut down on 4 mountains over here. 4 of those mountains are going to the Fire Nation Palace, and of course we have an extra cut there where we have the Blazemire Verge, which is no longer there. That is to make room for that Fire Nation Palace. I'll go into a bit more detail on that a bit later. The Blazemire Verge is no longer useful in the event that we have a Fire Nation Palace and a Blazemire Verge. We don't want to get stuck on that black mana with the amount of 1 mana spells and creatures that we have in our arsenal. We want to make sure that our mana is clear and that we can focus on that composition of lands, creatures, and pump spells. So another removal that we have, unfortunately, and this is something that I'll mention later, is a bit questionable. We have cut down on 4 of our Hired Claws. Why the Hired Claw? Because we needed to make room for the other cards that we're going to include, and because if we're going to cut down on 1 Hired Claw, might as well cut down on all of them. They work really well together, so that is one of the decisions that we've made so far in our testing. We've cut down on 1 copy of Full Bore, and to be discussed later as well, we've cut down on 2 copies of Callous Sellsword, or really cut down on Burn together. And that is mainly because we're not able to cast the Callous Sellsword part at all at this point, just because we've cut down on the Blazemire Verge. What have we added to the deck, though? We've added 4 copies of Fire Nation Palace. We've added 4 copies of Firebending Student. We've added 2 copies of Burnout Bastronaut and 2 copies of Wild Ride. I'm going to explain a bit in more detail the reasoning behind all of these inclusions. The biggest one here, of course, is that our composition has changed, where we used to have 9 total 1-drop creatures. Now we have 7. We used to have 8 2-drop creatures, not counting Callous Sellsword, of course. We now have 12. So this presentation is going to be kind of broken down between 3 parts. The first part is the critical part, and it is in the name of the deck, Firebending Mana. What we're going to do with that Firebending Mana, what it means, and the problems that come with it. The second part is really the adjustments to the deck that we're going to go over. And the third and last part is a more definitive part to the changes that we're going to be making with the Last Airbender. It is going to be the major sideboard buffs that we have received with this set. So for Firebending Mana, Firebending is an ability that says whenever this creature attacks, add X red mana. That mana lasts until end of combat. Some creatures have a certain number of, or spells as well have a certain number attached to that mana. We're going to be playing 2 cards over here. Fire Nation Palace, which is the land that adds 4 Firebending mana, and Firebending Student, which adds X mana, which is attributed to the Firebending Student's power. So the first big addition to the deck here is Fire Nation Palace. It reads, this land enters tapped unless you control a basic land. You can tap it for red mana, and it has the second activated ability here, where you can tap it and pay 1 colorless, 1 red, and target creature you control gains Firebending 4 until end of turn. That basically means that you can provide extra mana if you have 3 other lands in play. So if you have 3 lands in play, you can basically make 4 mana, which really speeds up your capabilities around a turn 3 kill. One kind of downside to that is, it's a bit vulnerable to removal. So if your opponent has untapped mana and you decide that one of your creatures gets Firebending 4 until end of turn, move to declare attackers, they can basically bounce that in response to you moving to that step before you actually get that Firebending 4. Another benefit of this is it can trigger Emberheart Challenger's Valiant. So the Valiant trigger over here will get you an additional card. We have talked before about how Rockface Village would have been nice to include, but with the amount of instant speed pump spells that we have that are 1 mana, we really cannot afford to have that 1 colorless possibility where we can't cast all our pump spells. So we finally have a land that can trigger our Valiant trigger. Downsides to this. We, of course, have this enter tapped if we do not have a mountain. Luckily, our mana composition is 14 mountains, 4 Fire Nation Palace, so it's very unlikely. And unlike Blazemar Verge, if it enters tapped, it enters tapped. You still get to make red mana the next turn. If you, say, have 2 Fire Nation Palaces in your hand and no other lands. As opposed to Blazemar Verge, where that was problematic because you don't want to be stuck on only making black mana. You need as much red mana as possible to be able to cast all those 1 mana pump spells and, a few of the 1 mana creature spells. A downside to this, and this is going to be a big theme throughout this deck, is the mana loss between phases. You don't get to keep the Firebending mana throughout your phases. So as soon as the combat step ends, you lose that mana before main phase 2. So you don't get to basically Firebend 4 and then use that on your second main to, say, hard cast a Leyline of Resonance. We also have Firebending Student. Firebending Student is a big creature that we're kind of orienting this deck around right now. And this has multiple benefits. It has prowess. We were looking for another very good prowess creature. We found one. And the other benefit here is with Firebending X, where X is this creature's power. All of our spells being pump spells, it can provide an absurd amount of mana. Downsides to it. It does not have haste, and again, we lose mana between phases. A good thing, though, is that this is really a kill on sight card. So if we, say, have a plotted select shot and we play Firebending Student, they really have to use the removal on it, or else they're pretty much screwed the next turn. For the mana loss between phases, I had talked a lot about including Electro and Orbeo, as if you know it online. In order to keep that mana between phases and also between turns, with the absurd amount you could create, you could just put that onto Electro and then burst out that mana once it leaves the battlefield. With the testing I've done so far, it seems like we do have enough to kind of keep using, or to be able to use all the Firebending mana that we create through those 2 first cards. So a first one we have is, of course, Stadium Headliner. We can activate Stadium Headliner's ability, where we can sacrifice it to deal damage equal to the number of creatures we control to a target creature. So this is a good removal spell. We've also talked about Turn Inside Out on Stadium Headliner and how it can activate the Manifest Dread ability on that end. So Stadium Headliner's 2 mana ability seems more promising than ever now. We also have Burnout Bastronaut. We can pump up Burnout Bastronaut. It has that activated ability there where this creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. If it has double strike, that's even better. That's another power doubler basically in our arsenal. So that's a big reason behind the inclusion of Burnout Bastronaut now. And it's somewhat an alternative to the ability to pump the Hired Claw. However, the +1/+0 only lasts until end of turn, but it is limitless. You can pump it up as many times as you want. So say you create 10 mana, you can pump this up by 5 total power. We are, of course, keeping Kellon Planar Trailblazer, so we can level up Kellon. We can level it up twice until it gets double strike, and then basically see 2 cards off the top of our library if it hits twice. We have the Manifest Dread idea. The amount of times I've seen this in play or played out where I had the Firebending student and I had some Manifest creatures. You're able to flip all of those over with that at instant speed. So you can use that mana towards that. And of course, a big one that we have built into the deck, or always have had built into the deck, is all of the instant speed pump spells. We have Dreadmaw's Ire, Full Bore, Turn Inside Out, Might of the Meek, and Bulk Up. All of these we can use our instant speed mana towards pumping up our creatures even more and going for that lethal damage. Lastly, we of course have some cards that we're going to be including, which involve mana retention. We still have Electro or Bayo in the sideboard, and what we're going to talk about a bit later when we're talking about the main sideboard buffs that we're going to get is the Last Agni Kai, which allows you to keep that mana until end of turn. Part 2 of this video is really around the adjustments to the deck. It's going to be broken down into 3 parts. We're going to be discussing a bit Blazemire Verge and Callous Sellsword, the Haste competition that's going on to give that, or to go over that Firebending student Haste problem, and lastly, some cuts, available slots, and the possibilities with this deck. So for Blazemire Verge, we have decided to cut down on that because we do not want to get stuck on black mana. We no longer have 18 other mountains to make sure that we are able to tap Blazemire Verge for red. It is too risky at this point. We don't really need to cast Callous Sellsword. It was a last resort in the previous deck anyways. So now that we've cut down on 1 Blazemire Verge, it might be time, and this also goes with other considerations, to cut down on Burn Together and cut down maybe 2 copies of Callous Sellsword is what we're looking at right now. I do tend to really like Burn Together and really be critical of people that cut down on Burn Together and sideboarding. But the less copies of Burn Together that you have, the more effective it is. So with 2 copies in your main board, you really are happy when you see it in your starting hand. It's a power doubler, effectively, if you are able to do damage and then fling that creature at your opponent. And yeah, the risk of getting 2 Burn Togethers in your hand is much lower now. The second part is, of course, the Haste competition. So this is a big thought process behind the brewing, and I'm going to continue testing this deck, so it is by no means definitive what we are including, what we are excluding in this deck. I considered 3 main cards that could provide haste to the Firebending student, each with their positives and each with their negatives. So the first card, and the one that decided to win in the limited amount of playtesting that I've done, is Wild Ride. So Wild Ride, of course, the goal here is to provide haste. An extra benefit of Wild Ride is it can harmonize, meaning that you can cast it twice. And because we pump our creatures so much, sometimes inadvertently, and we only need one creature that's big enough so we can burn together or bulk it up and double up on that. Sometimes inadvertently, you can maybe make a Slick Shot Show Off bigger through its own +2/+0 power or prowess type ability. You can play Wild Ride twice in a turn sometimes. An extra bit of synergy that I've seen actually is when we manifest Dread, we can purposely bin a Wild Ride. Say we get two spells, we get a Wild Ride and a Dreadmaw's Ire when we're manifesting Dread. Binning the Wild Ride allows us to cast it for its Harmonize ability for free, and we get that 2/2 creature. The downside to Wild Ride, very clearly, it is only at sorcery speed. So that goes back also to the mana retention issue. It is very nice to be able to say on turn 3, even just to have that threat of casting Firebending Student and Wild Riding it to give it haste, trigger its prowess ability, pump it up, and then Firebend, and then maybe dump out your hand. It is such a big threat, and that's why I think it takes the cake. There are other options though that I will continue testing, and that feel free to test yourselves and let me know what you find is most effective in these. The second one is Haste Magic. Uh, Haste Magic, of course, the goal here, provide haste. It also gives a small toughness boost, which is good against red based damage removal. We don't really care that much about damage-based removal with the new meta, but it does give that ability, especially when you're playing Last Agni Kai, where two creatures fight each other. Toughness can come into consideration. It also allows you to exile a card from the top of your library, and you can play it until your next end step. So you could play this on your opponent's turn, sure, but the idea is once you're firebending, you can either cast Haste Magic to give your Firebending Student haste, or you can cast it with that extra mana to basically get more cards off the top of your library that you can then pump your Firebending Student or other creatures even more with. A downside to this, of course, is the converted mana cost. It is not effective for turn 3 kills. It's the basically if you have a Firebending Student out on turn 3, you cannot pump it up with a Haste Magic to get that haste ability. So what we're looking for really is things that incentivize the turn 3 kill. It is good for turn 4 kills, 100%, but I think a bit maybe too slow for what we're looking for. Felonious Rage. This is something I played in Standard, especially when we had the Cacophony Scamp, as well as Heartfire Hero, before rotation and before bans. And Heartfire Hero and Cacophony Scamp, neither of them really had haste, so this was a very big benefit. It also triggered the Valiant trigger on Heartfire Hero, and those tended to be sacrificed anyways at the end of turn. So it provides haste, meets that condition, of course, and it is a watered down version of Turn Inside Out. I say that in the sense that you can't bin a Wild Ride, you can't really find creatures that you can then flip the Manifest Dread for. They really are stuck as 2/2 white and blue detective creature tokens. The downside to this, of course, is that it is only +2/+0, which means it is low value for what you get. With the prowess abilities that we have now that we have more prowess creatures, however, the +2/+0 is still very attractive because we get that extra +1. So that changes it from a difference of 2 versus 3 to 3 versus 4, which is, considerable over here. Still, I think in the haste competition, I tend to side a bit more on the Wild Ride side for now, and it is only a 2 of that we are including it for. Cuts, available slots, and possibilities. The last part of part 2. We have made some very tough decisions in here. I've mentioned before how we're not, 100% certain behind some of the cuts we're making. A bit of the reasoning behind the cuts to hard claw I've mentioned also is because hard claws tend to work together. So rather than cut down on a lot of cards across the board, it is easier to say just cut down on all 4 hard claws, include the Burnout Bastronaut to get that pump ability for the instant firebending mana, and to be able to use all of that mana rather than just be able to pump up hard claw once per turn. We've also cut down on 1 mountain. Overall, we've cut down on a total of four, of course, but with the Blazemire Verge and only Fire Nation palaces, including we are 1 land short. I think that is something that is very likely to change. The reasoning behind it is a bit high because Firebending Student can provide so much mana that we don't necessarily always need that 3rd or 4th mana to go for a lethal inducing threat anymore. Firebending Student creates its own mana, and we can dump our hand much more easily that way. Still, we do need 3 lands if we want to activate the Fire Nation Palace's ability. So something to consider there. There are, of course, very few available slots. We do need to make some cuts in here, and I'm going to keep playing around with the list and keeping it up to date on X or Twitter, as well as maybe make some YouTube videos in the near future on some more discoveries and updates to this deck. But I've been looking at different cards. One example here shown on screen, we have Pedal to the Metal. A very interesting card, I thought, to include, especially in a Leyline deck and in a deck where we can create absurd amounts of mana. Pedal to the Metal, if we pay that X, say we have, 10 Firebending mana, we can basically X equals 9, pay for the 1, we get first strike, and if we get a Leyline out there, by the way, we don't have to pay that 9 again, or it doesn't become 0. It stays the amount that we paid. So X stays the same when you double up on Leyline. So if we pay 10 mana for Pedal to the Metal off of Firebending Student, and we have Leyline out, that will become X equals 9 twice. So we will get a total of 18 on that, plus the 1, of course, from Firebending Student. Or, well, of course, the power of Firebending Student would be bigger. Other possibilities, I'm very inclined to add more copies of Bulk Up in the deck, just because of how much mana that can produce and how easy it is actually to get access to that amount of mana at instant speed. And last but not least is how easy it is actually to cast Bulk Up for its flashback cost now that we have a Firebending Student that can create absurd amounts of mana. There are other cards as well that I'm considering. A lot of these tend to be actually commons and uncommons, ironically, but it makes for, a fun brewing experience, and there's going to be a lot of playtesting in the near future. The last part of this video, a bit shorter, is the major sideboard buffs that we have. So we have the Last Agnikai and Redirect Lightning. These are 100% to be included in this deck. The Last Agnikai. So target creature you control fights target creature an opponent controls. If the creature the opponent controls is dealt excess damage this way, add that much red mana. Second part is where it gets really interesting, is until end of turn, you don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases end. So this is extremely good for really grindy matchups. You can very easily hard cast some ley lines on your end step with the excess damage that you have. And it's a must sideboard in if you're playing against creature heavy decks. A big example of this, of course, is Simic Aggro, because of the amount of low toughness and low power creatures that they get, those mana dorks. Just pumping up your creature and fighting off a mana dork, creating so much mana to pump up your other creatures later. It is amazing. You also get to, of course, keep that mana until your end phase. which is fantastic. It's not as good, of course, as keeping your mana between turns as Electro offers, but still very good. And, this is very effective removal for our deck, especially when we pump up our creatures already. The second spell that we have here is Redirect Lightning. This card I've found is usually good in games 2 and 3. So after your opponent has already sideboarded in, usually a lot of pieces of removal, which is very good against these Leyline decks. So one thing to consider here is that you have to make sure that the target of Redirect Lightning is actually legal. As an additional cost to cast this spell, pay 5 life or pay 2. Usually you're just going to pay that 5 life because you don't really care about your life total with this deck. You're just trying to kill your opponent as fast as possible, which you can usually do before the vast majority of decks. And you get to change the target of target spell or ability, which could be the ability of a creature already on the field, with a single target. Make sure that the target is legal, meaning that if there is a Burst Lightning, that deals 2 damage to any target, then you can basically burst lightning instead of that going onto your creature. You can burst lightning their creature. You can burst lightning directly to their face, even if you want. If they have kicked that spell, that kicker stays the same. So the mode stays the same. If they decided to pay 5 mana for their burst lightning, then you get to do 5 damage to their face or 5 damage to any one of their creatures. Seam Rip. Over here, Seam Rip reads, when this enchantment enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value 2 or less until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. One interaction that can be a bit tricky here is an opponent controls. If you're redirecting lightning, it doesn't turn it into your opponent being that opponent. You are still the opponent of that spell. So you can't redirect lightning a Seam Rip to Seam Rip one of their existing Seam Rips or one of their creatures. It has to be a creature that you control because you are the opponent in that text for Seam Rip. So you can, of course, use Redirect Lightning to prevent that Seam Rip from taking one of the creatures you want, say a Slick Shot, turn it over to one of your stadium headliners, but it still has to be a legal target on your end of the field. So I would say Redirect Lightning, not so effective against Seam Rip. How about Into the Flood mod? This is a super convoluted one, and to kind of clarify on both of the previous examples here, it says return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. If the gift was promised, instead of return target non-land permanent opponent controls to its owner's hand. So if they choose the mode, of course, gift a tapped fish, and they decide to bounce your Leyline, you can, yes, change the target towards one of your creatures. You cannot change it towards one of their creatures because it is an opponent controls. So you are the opponent in this situation. You cannot Into the Flood Maw their things if they Into the Flood Maw your Leyline. However, if you decide to change the target of Into the Flood Maw to one of your creatures, say, instead of your Leyline being bounced to your hand, and they gifted a tapped fish, you get that tapped fish still. So you can bounce a creature to your hand and get a tapped fish. So I'd say it's okay against Into the Flood Maw. Protects your Leylines or protects your creatures that you really want on the field. Say you've pumped it up quite a bit. But yeah, there are some downsides when the card reads that it has to target a permanent your opponent controls. How about No More Lies? That's the last example I'll use here. A counter spell type spell. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. Of course, you can cast Redirect Lightning and have the counter spell of No More Lies in this situation actually counter the Redirect Lightning. Or if there are multiple spells on the stack, you can even counter something that they have. So yeah, that's something to consider. It is quite effective against counterspells, mostly because you can redirect it towards countering the redirect itself. So I would say yes, it is effective against counterspells. That is it for the Leyline Firebending video. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them in the comments. And please like this video, subscribe, and look out for more content. I will be playtesting more with this deck and making some regular updates to it. And yeah, if you have any ideas based on your own testing of this deck, please let me know. I'm always open ears to hearing about your experiences, what you think is good, what you think is bad with regards to these cards. Hoping to bring this to the Pro Tour at Lorwyn Eclipsed in end of January. So thanks very much for tuning in and have a nice day.